Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another book chat here at the Poison Pen. I am Patrick. I am the science fiction and fantasy selector here at the bookstore. Yes, one of two Patricks. Anyways, it's really exciting. We've got one of my all-time favorite writers, Rebecca Roanhorse, here for her fifth book, Black Sun. Rebecca, welcome. Thank you so much.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So this is so cool. This is release week for you.
It
How
is.
crazy is release week? Because I've heard you've had a pretty tight schedule.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. Not only is it release week, so I'm on virtual book tour, but I'm also in a TV writer's room from sort of a 9 to 5 schedule, and I'm moving. So I just had to add a few extra things in case, I had some downtime and, I needed something to do. So
Uh,
yeah, so thanks for working with me because I know the schedule's crazy.
and moving on top of everything else, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I could just say that that just adds an extra dimension of craziness to your work life schedule.
It does.
Um, so what's this tour been like? What's life like doing a tour in the time of COVID?
Oh, normally when you're on book tour, you have to get on an airplane, and fly somewhere, and then you stay in a hotel, and then you do it all over again for about a week. And it's this huge blur of travel and sort of like nuttiness. So it's actually kind of nice to be able to do it from your home. Most of my home is in boxes, but nevertheless, I'm here. I have my family. I get to eat dinner at my own table every night. So there are some benefits to it.
That is excellent. Yeah, usually when we get the authors on their book tours at 7 p.m., they're jet lagged because they've been up since 4 a.m. to get to the next location. They might have had the chance to take a nap in their hotel room, and then they're up again the next night at 3 o'clock in the morning to get out of Phoenix to
Yeah.
the next location. So it is not as glamorous as it actually
No.
sounds.
Unfortunately, no, it is not as glamorous as you might hope.
My biggest concern, honestly, is time differences, right? Because
Mm.
we've been doing some events with some UK writers, so we've been talking with them from England and Scotland and all over, and trying to make sure that their time syncs up with Arizona time, and we've got
Hmm.
exactly right. It's a little nerve wracking. So um, I was a little concerned. I called Barbara up, our store owner, tonight, and I said, "Are we talking with Rebecca at 7 o'clock her time or our time?" And she said,
Right, right. I think I
"We're just."
checked like 5 or 6 times. I kept going, maybe I should go back and check the email just in case. So I think we all have the time zone, yeah, like confusion.
So this is book five. You've written The Trail of Lightning and Storm of Locusts. Then you went in and wrote a children's novel,
Right.
a Star Wars novel, and now The Black Sun. So you've been writing kind of all over the place for science fiction to fantasy and children's. Um, what I mean, you're just so incredibly busy. Um, what have you learned over that time from that first novel to now within Black Sun as a
Mm.
writer?
Gosh, a lot. One of the things I think people, so writing is an art. We are, artists,
Mhm.
but you have to have a lot of discipline because once you've sold your first book, now you're on deadlines, right? And so Trail of Lightning took me 3 years to write. But of course, I was working full time at the same time. Star Wars, I only had 4 months to write. So I had actually quit my full time job in order to take that gig. And I think I learned the most probably writing that book because the editorial process is very collaborative as well. So, for example, for my Star Wars book, it tied into the Rise of Skywalker, the movie. So I had J.J. Abrams like give me notes, things like that. So that was pretty an amazing experience. And so I brought all of that, I think, to Black Sun. And I will tell you, I wrote a version of what was to become Black Sun I wrote, gosh, I guess like a 95K draft, and I turned it into my editor. And this was like January, I think, of 2019. And he was sort of like, it's good, but it's not great. And he says he did not say it was not great, but I heard not great. And I was like, oh, how dare he? So I took it back and I really tore that draft down to its bones. And just took, sort of some of the elements of the world building, a name or two, things like that, that I still liked. And I rewrote the whole thing from scratch in about less than a year, probably about 9 months. And yeah, I think that, sort of brought all the skills that I have learned to bear. So yeah, hopefully now it's a little closer to great.
It's interesting because you mentioned the fact that working on Star Wars, it was a really collaborative project. And I hear from so many writers that writing a novel, it takes a village. Do you feel that that is the case, that writing a novel does sort of take a village to get it up there and to get it polished?
I think that getting it to the shelf takes a village. I was writing in IP when I was writing in Star Wars. So there's a lot more feedback, like there's a lot more editors' hands are sort of in the pie. But for something like Black Sun, you are sort of writing in a little cocoon, like most of the time, until you show it to someone. And you want to always be sort of careful about showing it too early, because early feedback can often sort of dampen your creativity. You might have taken it in some wild way that it's easy to sort of shut down, but maybe that's actually the right path. So I'm always very careful about when I decide to get feedback. But I do have a critique group here in Santa Fe with some awesome science fiction and fantasy writers, because Santa Fe is really a hotbed for great science fiction and fantasy writers. And so they definitely gave me feedback. They definitely made the book better, but they came in at probably like the 50,000 word mark, and then about at the 100,000 word mark. And then I have a great editor, Joe Monty, who he's a very, I like to say he's a very like subtle editor. I've had a number of different editors, and they each have a different style. Some are very red pen, heavy handed. Joe is more like, have you considered, changing this? Or have you thought about the implications of this? So he's sort of the idea guy to sort of push you in certain directions. And then once, he gives his okay, we usually go a round or two with him. And then it does take that village at SAG to bring it to life. I mean, an amazing cover. My very subtle display in the background, right? But the artist who did this, John Picasso, did the cover, and it's just gorgeous. And he did such an amazing job. I think he really captured something about the book. And so, he's part of the village now. He's part of the family. It all sort of goes into the mix to get the book on the shelf.
I've got the art here, and it's really very Southwest in kind of its sort of style, that, you go into one of the art galleries in Santa Fe or in Old Town Scottsdale, where we are, and you see a lot of art not too dissimilar from the cover, which is really, really cool. Did you have any say in your cover art, or was that something that, they just sort of went and did?
No, I had some say. Not all writers do, and not on every project. But my editor asked, if I had any artists in mind. And since this was a book inspired by the pre-Columbian Mesoamerican cultures, I wanted to get an artist that sort of had some sort of grounding in that culture or the background. And John Picasso is the artist, and he's Mexican-American. And I wanted him to, and his art is just gorgeous. He's won, I think, multiple Hugos and all kinds of awards for it. And I wanted him to bring his sensibility to that world because I just thought he would be a great fit. So I give a few ideas. The book is about the main character. Really, there's 4 point of view characters, but the primary character is Serapio, his name. And So I knew this was going to be his story. So we thought about, okay, he's on the cover. And then we knew, crows, there was going to be something about crows and an eclipse. And I think John read maybe the first 50 pages of the book. That's it. And then came up with this art. And from there, it's Joe and John and the wonderful art director and art team at Saga Press. And then I just sort of look at it afterwards and go, it's awesome. So,
what I really like about your writing is that you take it in a direction outside of, your first series was really kind of an urban fantasy set in a future. This book is more of a fantasy thriller, would be the best way for me to describe this, which I think is really fun because you do have elements of the thriller within this book. There is a very definite sort of countdown from where we're going before the eclipse to the day of the eclipse, right? And so we've got that clock that's counting down that's so common in a thriller novel, but then you bring us also on an incredible adventure. Can you describe that adventure a little bit without too many spoilers?
I will try. So Black Sun, I think, I said it's this big, sprawling, epic fantasy inspired by the cultures of the pre-Columbian Americas. So everything from the maritime Maya to like Incan architecture to Mississippi mound builders, the ancestral Puebloans, all of that sort of inspired this secondary world that we call the Meridian. And it is, of course, fantasy. It's not history. So I took a lot of liberties. There are also giant corvids that people ride. There's blood magic. There's celestial prophecies. All of this sort of goes into the story. And the story follows 4 point of view characters, primarily. Serapio that I mentioned. And he is you meet him as a boy early in the book, and I won't say too much because I don't want to spoil it, but he has been chosen to fulfill a destiny that is sort of God-touched, to say the least. He is the avatar of a vengeful God, and he sort of has to decide if he's going to follow that path of destiny or if he's going to try to choose his own destiny. There's Shiala, who is we meet her waking up in jail after a night of drinking. Yep. She is sort of your swashbuckling ship captain, and she has a magic of her own, which she will sort of discover. There is Narampa, the sun priest, who is a woman who was sort of born on the wrong side of the tracks, but has risen through the ranks to sort of rule this institution. And, my tagline for her that I always like is that she loves this institution, but the institution does not love her back. And she's very reform-minded, and, sort of a do-gooder, I guess. But nobody else is interested in reform. They're happy the way it is. So she's sort of a thorn in their side. And she will have to deal with the consequences of that. And then there's a fourth character who is sort of a privileged son of one of the clans, who comes in sort of later in the book and becomes important by the end. So that's sort of the setting. And I already forgot your question because I just gave you my whole book thing. So what was your question again, Pat?
Oh, no worries. So I think you've given us a little bit of a taste of what Sun is about, but really it is an adventure. It is all about Serapio and sort of his quest leading him up to this eclipse.
Right. So all these characters, they sort of start in disparate places and they meet up. They're on a collision course under this sort of cosmic occurrence that's going to happen. And they're antagonists, they're on sort of different sides of the question. And they're sort of set up that only one side can survive. And sort of, you don't know who that's going to be. And hopefully, if I did it right, you're conflicted about which side you want to support in this. And so, that's sort of the setup. It is an adventure in that sense. I think it's I was very inspired by the epic fantasies that I read as a kid. I'm a huge fan of epic fantasy. Grew up on, the Belgariad and the Wheel of Time and the Dragonlance Chronicles and all of that stuff. And then later, Game of Thrones, and all books like that, and a Dune. I'm sure you could see a huge Dune influence in this book. But yeah, so I think that's sort of the trope language that I'm borrowing from, but hopefully I'm bringing something fresh to the genre as well. So I'm taking those tropes, I'm playing with a chosen one trope, but perhaps it's someone who's chosen for a destiny of villainy, and they have to decide if that's something they want to embrace or not. So that's sort of where the thriller thing, that's really interesting. I think that's because I have an obsession with pacing. So if you've read my earlier work, I'm very much about, sort of throw you out the gate, nonstop. We're going to set this on fire until the end. Black Sun is not quite that quickly paced. I did slow it down a bit because it is epic fantasy, and I feel like you can be more chewy. With epic fantasy, you can really live in that world. People want to live in the world a little more, sort of settle in and understand sort of this depth of culture and history. You want that weightiness to it that you don't necessarily need in urban fantasy. But I did put a clock on it too, because it makes me nervous.
Well, it is epic fantasy, but it's uniquely your own style, which is great. I mean, you've got some really kick-ass heroines. There's some of my favorite characters that you write, because you write strong females really, really well. And I enjoy that. Shala happens to be my favorite character out of Black Sun. I like her an awful lot. I think she's really an interesting character too. So when you're developing your characters, what goes into your mind of how you're going to create them, what makes them unique, and what do you like best when you're writing the characters? Do they come to you? I'm very curious about how you come up with them.
Yeah, so I think every character has a little bit of me in them somehow. So a character like Shiala, I wanted her to be very different from Maggie, the protagonist of the Sixth World series, who's sort of like in your face, violence, really struggling with whether she's a monster or not, because she's a killer. And I always say that Shiala, sort of couldn't hurt a fly unless she was the fly. She's very self-destructive. She's got a drinking problem. She keeps hooking up with the wrong people. It doesn't go well. She can't keep a job, to save her life. So when you meet her, she's sort of a hot mess. But she's got a good heart, and she doesn't take a lot of shit, from people. And so she's a very different kind of character. I was very excited to write a different kind of female character than what Maggie had been. And Narampa, of course, is yet another kind of, I think, strong female character. But she's someone who really has to decide whether or not she is going to work within the system or outside of the system. And her power is through sort of kindness and decision making, and whether that goes well for her or not, we shall see. But I think they all have strengths, in sort of different ways. But they definitely all have agency, and they definitely, all hopefully come alive on the page as very distinct individuals, with different histories and different needs and different wants, and different paths.
That is really cool. So who did you enjoy writing the most as? Did one character really come through to you?
Shala, yeah. Well, Shala and Serapio are like my favorites. I'll just put it up front. Yeah, and they are really, they develop a friendship that I think is really the heart of the story, sort of the engine of Black Sun. So what I always feel like is if you can get the character right, if you can get sort of the humanity of your story correctly, then you can do all these sort of interesting things with plot and world building and all of this sort of big thrillery type stuff, because there's a lot of political intrigue in this book. And there's layers, sort of layers that are revealed and machinations that, hopefully you have a couple of like moments where you didn't see that coming. But the through line, the thing that keeps, you sort of focused, I think, is that Serapio-Scialla relationship.
Absolutely. And it is, you really do shock us throughout the book, which is a lot of fun. I found myself gasping a few times thinking, you put them in some really great situations. And then, this is definitely book one leading us into book two. And that's really exciting too. Knowing that this world is going to continue on in a couple of years' time, I think, is exciting to know. I mean, we've got, you've probably already finished book two or somewhere in there in that process.
Coming along.
and we'll see it within the next year or two. So, but that's what's so exciting. I love fantasies where you finish up and you're like, I can't wait to be back in this world. I've enjoyed my time in it. And when a couple years goes down the road and I have to pick up book one, I'm glad to pick up book one. Again, to me is a sign of a good fantasy. In terms of pacing, I am really curious because you mentioned David Eddings, who is by far one of my all-time favorite fantasy writers. And he actually happened to live in New Mexico as well, at least at the end of his career. But he was very slow in terms of pacing and plotting, right? Basically, book one of the Belgariad, which is one of my all-time favorites, is really the introduction to the other four books. I mean, we don't really get into anything in book one. It's really book two that goes on. So you have a very different philosophy when it comes to pacing. So I'm curious, why the clocks, why the pacing? What is it that makes you feel like, okay, we need to move this on? I loved it. I love that sense, and I think it really works well with Black Sun. I'm just curious about, why you're pacing exactly.
Yeah, because we've all read Tolkien, and we all sort of like fell asleep at one point. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not dogging him.
Dangerous territory, Rebecca.
I know. Please don't hate me. No, I think that's just, my sensibility. I am sort of a stickler for pacing, and maybe it's because I also have read a lot of urban fantasy and a lot of books that sort of rely on sort of a modern sensibility for pacing. And I think epic, because of its nature and because, sort of the tropes of the genre, like I said, it can be meatier, it can be chewier, you can spend a lot more time sitting in it, but I do want it moving forward. I am not the reader or the writer that wants to read 20-page descriptions about your meal, or about your character's meal, or about, the way they made their clothes, or, something like that. And some people love that stuff, so more power to them. But that is not what I'm interested in.
I'm sure, though, as you were researching, you found some really cool facts that you probably that inner writer geek of you wanted to share. So I'm curious, what sort of research did you do for Black Sun? And maybe what were a couple of those things that you really wanted to include, but maybe pulled back a little bit because it didn't quite work with the info that you were giving the reader?
Yeah, so, I've been reading about sort of pre-Columbian Mesoamerican cultures for decades. It's always just been an interest of mine. I've always been fascinated by, especially Aztec poetry and architecture and, sort of all the things coming out of the Triple Alliance and all of this sort of history. So I already sort of had that grounding when I started, but then there were pockets of information that I did not have. Like I didn't know a lot about the maritime Maya. The book has a sea voyage, and so I based sort of the shipbuilding and the routes on the maritime Maya, and the sailing methods on like traditional Polynesian sailing methods, because I really didn't want it to feel like Western. I didn't want tall ships and, things like that. So all of that was sort of new, and that was very interesting. Another area, and actually in Black Sun at the very end, at the acknowledgments, I think I list about a half a dozen books that I thought were sort of crucial, but also accessible to people if they're interested and they want to find more about, the actual cultures and not my pretend one. But I also did a lot of research on crows, on corvids, because I knew I wanted, I have a number of sort of supernatural beasts in the book, like giant water striders and winged serpents. But, there's also just the lowly crow. But what I found fascinating about crows was that or one of probably my favorite facts, I guess, is that they hold a grudge, that they recognize faces of like the people that have done them wrong, and they pass that information on, to their children and their children's children. And so you can, piss off a crow and it can like affect you for, the rest of your life sort of thing. So, the moral of the story is don't piss off crows. But also, wow, they sure do make a great, sort of avatar for a god of vengeance, right? And so that's sort of where the crow mythology in the book was born. So it was sort of born from my sort of research into corvids in general.
That is so cool. And, what's fascinating too is that their crows are used in so many different mythologies and belief systems. I mean, from tonight, right after this, we're actually doing a Sci Friday book club on Kevin Hearn's Hounded. And the crow was a big symbol in Irish mythology. So, of course, with that, it was, so it just sort of fascinates me how certain beasts and creatures just sort of are in all sorts of different myths and mythos.
I think they really capture the human imagination. There's something about them that is, compelling.
Our camera guy is looking over at me. Do we have any questions yet? No questions? So for the audience, if you do want to type in your questions, feel free to. Rebecca and I will be glad to take those as they start to come in. So feel free to join us with a Q&A. So Rebecca, tell me, what is it like? You said that writing for Star Wars was a real learning environment for you. Was it sort of exciting to be a part of that Rise of Skywalker movement, that last film within the Skywalker trilogy, and being a part of that, but in novel form?
It was absolutely terrifying. So maybe the exciting came later, but first came the terror. It's a lot of pressure. It is obviously a well-loved franchise. People know those characters inside and out. It's a massive world to try to get your head around. And so there's really just, I think when I first sort of got the gig after I said yes, then I was kind of like, holy crap, what did I just sign up for? And I actually called Daniel Older, who wrote Last Shot, which is a Lando solo adventure. And he's a good friend of mine. And I was like, Daniel, how do you write a Star Wars? Where do you even start? And he was like, listen. They didn't hire you because the mechanics of an X-Wing, or because who all the characters were in Jabba's lair. They hired you because they like your voice. They know what you write. They think you can bring something to the franchise. So you write Rebecca Roanhorse's version of Star Wars. Don't worry about everything else. Right. And that was just beautiful. That really helped me get over the fear that I was going to mess it up, and so and so they give you some ideas. They give you a sort of, here's sort of what we want you to talk about. come up with like a 15-page outline, sort of pitch us your idea for what you think the story should look like, and then we'll show it to like 20 people and they'll all say yay or nay. So that was sort of it. I had a great editor, Tom Holler at Del Rey, who sort of held my hand through the process. He's wonderful. And of course, you have the Lucasfilm Story Group, which is a bunch of guys who live and breathe Star Wars. So you don't have to know the mechanics of an X-Wing. You can email someone and be like, so, hey, how can I break an X-Wing for, 10 to 15 minutes, but then it's totally repairable? And they're like, oh, well, if you loosen the dampener on the, and you're like, oh, okay.
Take notes, whatever
Exactly.
they say, bring it in. Oh my gosh. So was it fun? Did you find it, is it different writing within somebody else's universe versus your own a little bit?
Yeah. Oh, totally different. It's got pros and cons. I mean, the wonderful thing is clearly you don't have to do the massive amounts of world building and sustain that. Someone's already built the world for you. And they've sort of, to one degree or another, roughed out characters. So, for Resistance Reborn, that was a Poe book. So I really wanted to do a deep dive into Poe psychology that you couldn't get in a movie because there's just too many moving parts and you don't have enough time. So, I got to do a lot of character creation around that. But for someone like a Leia who comes to the story, bearing everyone's sort of love and expectations and there's so many people feel like they know her already, then your job is to sort of capture that voice. To find sort of the truth in her character that people will recognize and to honor that and to do a good job with it. So that feels more sort of like you're holding the precious egg in your hands and your job is to get it from one side of the book to the other. So yeah, that's I forgot the question, but that's the answer.
That is the perfect answer. It's so exciting because it's clear that you have a love for world building. And I think that you were talking about that in the last answer. What does your world building session look like? Because between the Sixth World and the Black Sun, it's clear that you have a lot of the world already figured out so that you give the reader the most cogent parts and not the Tolkien detail that we don't all really want to know, that history. But on the other hand, do you want to is your view much deeper?
Actually, I world build from the character out. So I am actually not a person who creates a lot of extraneous texts or Bibles or things like that, and then put my characters on top of the world that I have already created. I start with character and I say, what do they need? And then I sort of build out from there. So I know I have Shala. I know I want her to be a captain. So what does she need? She needs a seafaring culture. She needs a ship that works, within this world, and sort of go from there and sort of expand out from the center. And then when I'm about this big, I expand out a little more, and then hopefully these concentric circles start to happen in the world where all the characters are starting to connect and their worlds are starting to connect. And then I can deep dive, I can drill down a little bit on a certain topic like food or like clothes or, something like that to give more heft to the story. And Black Sun, each chapter starts with an epigram. And so I pull them from various sources like travel journals and books, a Book of Lamentations and a mythological cycle, a crow cycle, history of the clan, the Crow clan. And so those I create as well, but sort of after the fact rather than before. So those come in to give, to hopefully make the cultures feel like they've been around for centuries, hundreds of years, if not thousands. And so they have this heft to them, this weight of reality, the way that real cultures do.
That is so cool. That is so cool. It looks like Talon's jotting down a couple questions. Do you want to pass one off to me here? And we'll get it out in the world. All right. All right. So, um, somebody asked, did you have a specific audience in mind as you were writing?
Black Sun, you know.
Black Sun or Trail of Lightning?
Yeah. So I think, you know, for Trail of Lightning, I really wanted to update sort of the urban fantasy, the trope of that we see in a lot of urban fantasies of the half native character with, like, you know, usually animal changing powers or something. So I was really writing that, I think, for native readers and for urban fantasy readers, it started as for myself. Because it's what I wanted to read, because I was an urban fantasy reader. But then also I thought about, you know, sort of people like me in various ways. So I sort of wrote that for them. Black Sun, I think, because I had written Star Wars, which is definitely for the fans. You know, that is, I tried to pull in, you know, all kinds of disparate threads from the game narrative to sort of the expanded universe and everything. And so hopefully, you know, Resistance Reborn is something that the fans can love. So the book after that, Black Sun, I wrote really for me to a certain degree. Again, I went back to that sort of, what do I want to read? What do I want to see? What's the story that I want to tell? More so than worried about who's going to read it. And I think to a certain degree, I think that's what all writers sort of need to do. It's very, I think it can be very confusing to let sort of the reader in your head too much. You know, you really, because you've already, you know, have this conceit, this idea that you're going to write something and it's going to be so good that people are going to pay to read it. Like, really? I don't think so. You know, it doesn't happen very often. So you really have to find the story that only you can tell. The story that with all your parts, all your sort of moving parts and all your knowledge and your worldview and your life and all of that you can put into the book. And that's the story that you tell. And you just hope that you've done it in a way that there's commonality, that there's empathy, and that people can be like, hey, that's my story too. You know, those are parts of my life too. I recognize these people, I recognize these things, and they speak to me at a human level.
Absolutely. We actually had a writer's workshop last Saturday with Joey Day. He was really kind, and we did a virtual writer's workshop. And one of the things I really appreciated that he said was, write the book that you would want to read. Mm-hmm. Because as much as some people say, write towards trends, those trends change so much that if you aren't true to your own vision and you're not writing the book that you want to read, it's probably not coming through as true as writing the book that you would like to actually read. Would you agree with that?
I would 100% agree with that. Sometimes it can take 18 months for a book to make it from, hey, we bought your book, to, hey, it's on the shelves. And so writing to trends, you know, you're, like you just said, trends change. You know, that's a disaster. And just because something is out of trend, like when I wrote Trail of Lightning, urban fantasy was supposed to be dead. And so I got, you know, pushback about, well, nobody's writing urban fantasy or nobody's buying it anymore. And, you know, Trail of Lightning proved them wrong. So you just write what the book that you want to see in the world. I think that's a Toni Morrison quote paraphrased, and it's never done me wrong. It's the right thing to do. Toni said so.
So as now a writer into her fifth book, what was Rebecca before book one? What was it that, were you writing well before Trail of Lightning?
Yeah, I've been writing my whole life for myself. I won a poetry contest in third grade. It was a school-wide poetry contest. And after I won that award, I was like, oh, I'm a writer. But I tell that story. I think that's true. I can't remember third grade that well. But I did write my first short story in seventh grade. I actually turned a science project on the planets, you know, where you do like the circumference and the mass and all that sort of stuff, and did this sort of very emo telling of this astronaut who was on like a suicide mission into the sun. And it was very sort of, my 12-year-old self, tell my wife and kids I love them. I must run into the sun, which has a mass of X, Y, and Z, it has a circumference of, so my science teacher, I think I got a B+ on that. But I've always had the bug. And so I've always written for myself. I didn't really know I could be a science fiction and fantasy writer until later in life, because I really just didn't see science fiction and fantasy writers that look like me. Quite frankly, I didn't know that women of color wrote in the genre. I didn't come to Octavia Butler until I was an adult. Folks like N.K. Jemisin were a revelation, but it took me a while to discover her, and it took her a while to be discovered. So there weren't a lot of models, we just really didn't see it. And now more and more it's flourishing, and all these incredible new voices are sort of coming to the genre and enlivening the genre. And it's absolutely amazing, but it took us a while to get there, and it certainly took me a while to get here. So
how many books before Trail of Lightning got published?
Oh, I had never written a book. Okay, that's fair. I have scraps of paper. I have, 20 pages of some, farm boy on a quest, with some Welsh name that I wrote, at some point, or lots of vampires, I think, are in that drawer. So I had never actually tried to write a novel. So Trail of Lightning was actually the first novel I ever tried to write and finish. And so, luckily that one got picked up and got published.
That is awesome. But it proves that any budding writer, really the big thing is finishing your book, right?
100%. Yes. Because they cannot publish it if you don't finish it. Absolutely.
Exactly. So what's going to happen in the future? We know that book 2 is going to come out with Black Sun. Is this going to be a trilogy? Is this going to be a duology?
And right now? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And one of our audience members is curious if it's going to be a duology or trilogy, are you going to be able to have the same artists do the covers? They're really fond of your cover art.
Oh, wonderful. Did I talk about the cover art? I did. Yeah,
Did
John.
a
Okay. Yeah. So that's John. This is my second event tonight. So I just had to tell you, I'm like, what did I say? Did I already say that? But if I did not shout out the wonderful John Picasso, let me just do that again. So yes, I am very pleased that he is going to be doing the cover for book 2. Right now we have 3 books planned. And hopefully he will be on board for the whole process, because he's absolutely amazing. I love what he brings to the book. So yeah.
So what's your life like in the time of COVID? Has it changed at all, or is it pretty much the same? We've heard different things from different writers.
Yeah.
So I'm curious.
Well, I'm in a TV writer's room, so that's sort of a 9 to 5 gig, and that is something normally you would have to be in Los Angeles, have to live in Los Angeles to be in a writer's room. But because of COVID, all the writer's rooms are virtual. We're all in Zoom, and so I had this opportunity to come up, and I don't want to move to LA, but I'm happy to sort of log in and work with these brilliant people on this TV show. So that is something that could not have happened in sort of if life was back to normal. So that's pretty amazing. And I'm spending, of course, a lot of time, perhaps too much time, with my family. My poor daughter's in Zoom school. And so, yeah, so it's great, actually. And that is not to diminish, sort of the horror of COVID. And it's touched our lives too. We've had some family members get it. But it has slowed us down a lot in like a great way. I would have been traveling so much this year, but instead I'm home, and instead I get to be with my family and spend time with my daughter, and it's pretty awesome.
Exactly. From doing different cons to different bookstores to promote this book, those have all been kind of shut down. But at the same time, what I've really enjoyed is the fact that our conversations are, I think, maybe a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more informal. So we get to see the real writer come out, I guess, the real
Mm.
person come out in these interviews, which has been a blast. And this is such a cool book, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Gosh, is there anything that you want to share with the audience? What is coming out, or can you say the television show that you're working on? So,
No, of course
no,
not. It's a secret. I'll tell you, it's a
no,
high concept science fiction. Very excited. It's not, my creation. I'm just in the writer's room. But I'm absolutely loving it, and hopefully you will see it soon.
that is so cool. So it hasn't even aired yet. It's not a show that's
Correct.
out. Oh, okay. That's why absolutely we will keep that under wraps then. Rebecca, congratulations. This is so cool. I bet after 2 events you're completely exhausted. So we'll say goodnight to our Facebook audience. Thank you so much for coming. Just as a quick aside, Rebecca's book is our science fiction book of the month. If you go to the Poison Pen website, you can sign up for our science fiction book of the month club. It is usually a hardcover or paperback, sometimes signed by the author, and we send them out to you each month. We have some exclusive science fiction novels that we only get a handful of, and they go to that sci-fi club. So if you want to join, please feel free to. Rebecca, thank you for signing all of these Black Suns that we have here at the store. So if you want Rebecca's signature, you can order through the Poison Pen website. Congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
And
Pat.
Facebook, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Poison Pen. I'll see you
Absolutely.
IRL sometime in the future.
And we're done. How'd that go? Were you
Great.
happy?
Perfect.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Wonderful.
good. Rebecca, this has been so much fun. I'm sure you're exhausted. Two interviews in a row. Just a champ. Enjoy your family, stay safe, and hopefully for book 2, we get to see you here in the store.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love to come.
We're a short drive away from Santa Fe, just 8 hours.
Just 8 hours. We come down. My husband is an artist, so we come down for the Herd Museum show every year. So we're usually in town at least once a year.
Well, if there's any time that you're coming on down and you want to pop by the store and do an impromptu event or something like that, we'd love to have you.
Okay.
This is just so much fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Have a good night.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.